General Motors had high hopes for the Pontiac Solstice, but things did not go quite like they had wanted it to. So we're going to talk about the Pontiac Solstice and dive into some factors that led to this car's unfortunate lack of success. Alright, so let's jump right in. Now back in the day, we had a pretty cool two-seater from Pontiac. So looking past some of the issues, the Fiero was relatively successful. I mean, it looked great, it was economical. People complained about practicality, but then again, you don't go out and buy a car like this for practicality. And it was marketed as a sporty day-to-day commuter. So people thought the Solstice would be just as popular. Bob Lutz was GM's vice chairman of product development during the time. And he had a lofty goal, and that lofty goal was to turn his dream of building an affordable roadster into a reality. So he decided to start with GM's Excitement division. Lutz directed his team of engineers to come up with an entirely new rear drive platform called Kappa. So they had to go inside the General Motors parts bin to use existing parts and as a way to hit that target entry price of 20 grand. So from that parts bin, they took bits and pieces from things like the Cadillac XLR to the GMC Canyon and other vehicles as well. Now, of course, this was nothing new because GM has done this plenty of times before. I mean, just look at the F-body twins, the Camaro and the Firebird, or the GM10s, the list goes on. With all of those, they decided to use the same car, but with a different skin and badge, and this was a way to attract different buyers. So the Solstice started out as a concept in 2002, and Bob Lutz himself actually showed off this new Pontiac Solstice concept at the Detroit Auto Show in 2002. No, it did not have that awesome mid-engine layout like the Fiero, but it still had the typical two-seater characteristics. But they did say this car was originally planned to be a mid-engine sports car, but along the way that just didn't happen. So this car would have a unique design and a lot of things going for it at the time, like nimble handling, good value for the money, and it would look like nothing else on the road at the time. Of course, not counting the Saturn Sky, but we'll talk about that one another time. Pontiac established itself as a quintessential American car maker back in the day, with cars that quickly became classics. Like in the 1950s, we had the prestigious Bonneville. Later on, we saw things like the GTO, Firebird, and Catalina. So once upon a time, Pontiac was taken seriously by customers as well as the auto industry in general. But once the 2000s rolled around, Pontiac was losing a bit of their excitement. I mean, the Firebird was going away after 2002. They gave us a few GXP models and even brought over the Holden Monaro to serve as the new GTO. But the Pontiac Solstice was supposed to be yet another product to help bring back some of that excitement and make car guys like you and me fall back in love with this American brand. So General Motors gave the Solstice its public debut at the North American International Motor Show in 2004. Pontiac designers said they took inspiration from vintage British coupes and convertibles and designed the Solstice using some of those styling cues. The end result was actually pretty good. This car had got a lot of positive feedback and people just liked the way it looked. So here's a quick recap of what I mentioned. The Solstice started out as a concept in 2002. Then it transitioned to a production model in early 2004. And then it ultimately hit dealerships in 2005 as a 2006 model. So the new Pontiac Solstice was available from 2006 to 2010. And if you wanted one of these, you could get either a 2-door roadster or a 2-door coupe. Pop the hood and there will be either a 2-liter or a 2.4-liter engine. If you didn't know how to drive a stick, you could get a 5-speed automatic instead, but the guys that wanted that sporty feeling, they went with the zippy 5-speed stick shift. We've had two-seaters that were thoroughly sporty but were front-wheel drive as well. Not the Solstice. This car had the proper front-engine rear-wheel drive setup. So as I mentioned earlier, the Pontiac Solstice was very well liked, and a lot of car guys were itching to get their hands on one. So with everyone wanting one of these and all of the positive feedback, it was kind of hard to imagine what could have gone wrong. Since everybody liked the earlier cars that were shown to the public, General Motors decided to go ahead and quickly rush the Solstice into production. But since they did go ahead and rush production, GM cut corners as well. So I'm talking about build quality. Okay, build quality suffered, and there were various issues that popped up with different iterations of the Solstice. So going from concept in 2002 to being production ready by early 2004 is pretty quick when developing a whole new car, but they claim this was necessary because of time constraints. So yeah, there was a high demand for this car, and the Solstice quickly became popular with car guys. That said, Pontiac decided to go ahead and triple their initial production target from 7,000 all the way up to 21,000 units. So yeah, the demand for this thing was so great, they ended up having to triple their production numbers just to meet all of that demand. But there were some negatives that came with them rushing to meet the demand. General Motors was really expediting and pushing this thing into production, and as mentioned earlier, all that did was cause a decline in build quality. Once the automotive journalists got their hands on the car, many of them were saying how it felt cheap and it fell short in terms of driving performance despite its sporty appearance. But either way, regardless of what those naysayers had to say, the Solstice received nominations for the North American Car of the Year, and it also got nominated for Design of the Year from the Automobile Journalists Association of Canada. There were 7,000 orders just within the first 10 days, and an additional 6,000 orders over the span of a few weeks. And all of this came at a time when you could walk into a Pontiac dealership and get one of the new GTOs. The G8 wasn't out yet, but you could get an LS4 Grand Prix with over 300 horsepower. So the new Solstice looked great on the showroom floor next to those other models. The base engine was a naturally aspirated 2.4 liter 4-banger that cranked out 177 horsepower and 166 pound-feet of torque. In 2007, Pontiac introduced the GXP version of the Solstice, featuring a 2-liter turbocharged engine that cranked out 260 horsepower and could go from 0 to 60 in about 5 seconds, or 5.5 seconds. Times vary, but average time was around 5 seconds. So this one and the Saturn Sky Redline had different enhancements like a limited slip differential, improved suspension components in conjunction with the extra power. And if you wanted more power, there was an upgrade from GM Performance Parts for the GXP. This bumped up the turbo's power to 290 and 340 pound-feet of torque. So if you wanted this upgrade, it only cost an extra $650 and about an hour once you brought the car in for this particular mod. Throughout its 4-year model run, Pontiac produced just under 66,000 of these cars. While most of these cars were the drop-top versions, there were a handful of coupes made before the Solstice was discontinued. More on that later. The recession of 2008 took down a few brands. Okay, so this included Pontiac. You know, GM fell into bankruptcy, and this ended up bringing an end to Pontiac, Hummer, and Saturn. So in a nutshell, GM stopped making the Solstice and the Sky mainly due to bankruptcy and having to restructure itself, and it completely got rid of both brands. The Solstice was a fun car to look at, but sometimes a car like this is far from practical. There was a severe lack of trunk space in the Solstice, and when the top was down, it took up even more trunk space. But as I mentioned earlier, you don't buy cars like these for practicality. Fiero owners back in the day mentioned how the car was fun and all, but it was a pain in the neck to deal with, especially with just 2 seats and limited storage space. Okay, so let's talk about price. So when this car first came out for 2006, it was a bargain. It came in with an original MSRP of just $19,915 for the base convertible. So at that price, it even beat out the frugal Mazda Miata by about $500. When the GXP came out for 2007, it went for about $26,500. Now earlier I mentioned that you could get this car in a convertible or a coupe. That was not the case with the Saturn Sky, since that car was convertible only. As far as the Solstice, the drop-top version came out first, but in 2009, Pontiac decided to bring out the coupe version. With the coupe, you got the best of both worlds, hardtop and open air driving. It didn't exactly have T-tops, but what it did have was a removable roof panel that weighed just 31 pounds, and it was made out of lightweight material. And then there's the mallet, let's not forget that. So pretty much they were stuffing LS2s and LS7s in the Solstice and in the Sky as well. These things look like the typical Solstice on the outside, but they were really fire-breathing monsters. Matter of fact, Hot Rod Magazine did a similar swap on a Solstice, and with the car being so lightweight, that thing blazed from 0 to 60 in 3.3 seconds and ran the quarter mile in 10.99 seconds. Now imagine if that was the GXP we had got. If that was the GXP we had got, that would have been a total track monster, but you already know how that goes. That would have put the Corvette to shame, and you know, General Motors can't have that. So yeah, if Pontiac is ever brought back, this is a car I would like to see make a comeback. The Grand Prix, the Firebird, and either the Solstice or the Fiero, one or the other. I feel like these two would be too similar to have on the market simultaneously, plus we don't need any in-house competition. So that's pretty much the story of the Solstice. Let me know if you owned one, let me know if you drove one, and the Saturn Sky will be getting its own discussion, so stay tuned for that one. Alright, so let me know what you guys think, and I'll catch you on the next one.